The 2012 Holocaust Commemoration is presented by the Paul Peck Humanities Institute. This event features the portraits of life and Holocaust survivors of Montgomery County, Maryland. The keynote speakers are Holocaust survivors Edith Lowy and Manny Mandel.
We're going to have the lights go down, so I don't want you to be startled. The lights will dim, and then it will become dark, and we are going to have a program presented to you by Montgomery College students, a reading of the names with biography and photography.
Paula Weichman. Paula was raised in a religious Jewish family in a city in the southeast of Poland. Paula's father owned the only trucking company in the district. When Germany invaded, Paula's father did not wait for the soldiers to reach them. He loaded a truck and the family fled east to a town near the Soviet border. Paula's mother returned to their home for supplies and was stranded there. German forces occupied the whole area. Hearing that the Jews nearby had been massacred, the family built a bunker under the wooden floor of the textile factory where they worked. They knew that the pits the Germans and Ukrainians were digging were intended for them. On September 24th, 1942, police moved into the ghetto. People set fires everywhere. In the chaos, Paula and her father ran to the bunker. The bunker was discovered, and both Paula and her father were shot. She was only 14 years old.
Mario Finzi, born 1913 in Italy. Mario was the only child of a Jewish couple who were secondary school teachers. His family was well integrated into Italian society. Even when fascist leader Benito Mussolini came to power in 1922, the Jews in Italy continued to live in safety. Mario became a lawyer. In 1938, the government issued racial laws that prevented Mario from practicing. He moved to Paris and began a new career as a pianist. He went home for a visit and got caught in Italy when World War II started. Mussolini's government in Italy had been allied with Nazi Germany, but when Mussolini was overthrown, the Germans invaded. The Nazis deported Jews to the extermination camp Auschwitz. While there, Mario committed suicide by throwing himself on the electrified high-tension wire that surrounded the camp. He left behind a message for his parents, asking for their forgiveness. He was only 31 years old.
Miru Alkana, born 1915 in Greece. Miru's Jewish family was of Spanish descent and lived on the island of Rhodes. Italy had occupied the island since 1912. Miru was much integrated into the island community, and her life was beautiful, filled with family, friends, and school. She studied to become a midwife. The Nazis occupied Rhodes in September 1943. And on July the 23rd, that next year, Miru and his family were arrested and deported to Auschwitz. She was separated from her family. Her hair was cut short. She was branded with a number tattoo. She heard music in the camp and smelled what seemed to be burning meat. She was horrified to learn that the smell came from the crematoria, and that smell of burning human flesh. Miru was the only out of 57 members of her family to survive Auschwitz, and one of 161 Jews of Rhodes Island to survive. She came to the U.S. in 1950.
Joseph Musha Mueller. Joseph was born in Germany to gypsy parents. At the time of his birth, there were about 26,000 gypsies living in Germany. Though most were German citizens, they were often discriminated against and subjected to harassment. Members of the Hitler Youth tormented him. As a child, he was often made the scapegoat for pranks, called insulting names and beaten for misbehaving, even though he had done nothing wrong. When he was 12, he was taken from his classroom by two strangers who said he had appendicitis and needed immediate surgery. He protested, but was beaten and forced into surgery where he was sterilized. Nazi law allowed forced sterilization of people considered asocial, and that included gypsies. After his recovery, he was supposed to be deported to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, but was smuggled out of the hospital and hidden. He survived by hiding in a garden shed for 5 months.
Helene Melanie Lebel, born in 1911 in Austria. Helene was raised Catholic by her Jewish father and Catholic mother in Vienna. Her father died in World War I when she was just 5 years old. Helene's mother remarried when she was 15. Helene loved to swim and go to the opera. After finishing secondary school, she began law school. But by the time she was 19, Helene began showing signs of mental illness. She had to give up her law studies. At the age of 25, she suffered a major breakdown, was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and she was placed in Vienna's Steinhof Psychiatric Hospital and stayed there for several years. Her parents thought she would come home as her health improved. Instead, they were told that she had been transferred to a hospital across the border from Bavaria. But Helene could not come home. She was sent to a converted prison in Brandenburg, Germany. There, she was undressed, given a physical examination, and led into a shower room. Helene was one of 9,772 persons gassed that year at Brandenburg Euthanasia Center. The cause of death was officially listed as acute schizophrenic excitement. She was 29 years old.
Rémy Dumoncel. Rémy was born in a small French town and raised as a Catholic. He studied at the University of Paris. He then joined a publishing house there. During World War I, he served in the French army and was wounded 5 times. He married and had 5 children. In 1935, he became mayor of Avon, a small town near Paris. A strongly patriotic Frenchman, he distrusted Germany after Hitler came to power. The Germans occupied Avon on June 16, 1940. Rémy became active in the underground and gave financial support to Jewish and other writers whose works could no longer be published. He used his office as mayor to shelter and protect Jews and other fugitives. He did this by providing them with false papers and helping them flee to safety. On May 4, 1944, Rémy was arrested by Gestapo and sent to Neuengamme concentration camp, where he died on March 15, 1945.
Hasha Rivkina, born 1923 in Belorussia. Hasha was the oldest of 3 girls born to a Jewish family in Minsk. Before World War II, more than 1/3 of the city was Jewish. Hasha attended Soviet schools and had a reputation as a good singer. The invading Germans reached Minsk on June 27, 1941. Hasha's house was bombed the next day, and her family had to live on the street. Soon, they was forced into the Minsk ghetto. On November 7th, Hasha and her family hid in their ghetto apartment during a German roundup of Jews. Hiding was agonizing. They were sure the Germans would find them at any time. They feared that deportation meant certain death. The family escaped that roundup in 1941, but they were deported 2 years later. Hasha's sister escaped the ghetto, but following deportation, the others were never heard from again.
Moise Ghani. Moise's family and other Jews had lived in Greece and the Balkans for over 1,000 years. For a few years, he went to study in Italy, but then returned to Greece. As a young man, Moisey worked as a bookkeeper and administrator at the local electrical company. For fun, he and his friends liked to picnic by the sea. The Germans invaded Greece in 1941, and in March 1944, the Jews of Moisey's town were deported to Auschwitz. There, Moisey was assigned to Birkenau as part of the Sonderkommando, a work unit that took dead bodies to the crematoria. On October 7, 1944, the Sonderkommando in Crematorium 4th revolted, killing an overseer, disarming the guards, and blowing up the whole crematorium. Soon others in the Sonderkommando, including Moisey, joined in the uprising, knowing that this was a suicide mission. Moisey was killed. He was just 31 years old.
Flora Mendelovitz. Flora's Romanian-born parents moved to Belgium in the 1920s to escape anti-Semitism. Flora was the oldest of 3 girls. In 1937, her father lost his furniture repair shop, found work as a ship's carpenter, and began to travel the world. In 1938, he was in America, hoping to bring his family to join him. The Germans invaded Belgium in May 1940, and Flora had to wear a yellow star. Other children insulted her because she was Jewish. Life became increasingly difficult. One day, they were forbidden to go to school, then they could not attend movies. When she tried to go to the park, there was a sign that said, "No Jews or dogs allowed." Flora and her sisters were hidden in convents. Their lives were saved by George Ranson and Father Bruno Reynards, a Benedictine monk. Flora, of blessed memory, became a student at Montgomery College and the University of Maryland and taught French in Montgomery County.
Friedrich Paul von Grossheim. Friedrich Paul was born in northern Germany. He was 11 years old when his father was killed in World War I. After his mother died, he was raised by 2 elderly aunts. After graduating from school, he trained to be a merchant. In January 1939, the secret police arrested 230 men in his town under the Nazi revised Criminal Code paragraph 175, a code which outlawed homosexuality. There were mass arrests of homosexuals. He was released after 10 months, but then arrested again, humiliated, and tortured. The Nazis finally released him on the condition that he agreed to be castrated. He submitted to the operation. Because of his operation, he was rejected as physically unfit for military service during the war. In 1943, he was arrested again and imprisoned as a political prisoner in concentration camp. After the war, he moved to Hamburg.
Judith Schwed. Judith was the older of 2 children born to Jewish parents in southeastern Hungary. Her father had a prosperous wholesale business that sold goose meat, down, feathers, and coals. In 1939, the same year Judith started school, the Hungarian government enacted a new law stating Jews were not entitled to the same rights as other Hungarians. In 1940, Hungary became an ally of Nazi Germany. More laws were passed to restrict the rights of Jews. Judith, who was a good student and wrote articles for a children's newspaper, was forced out of public school. In March 1944, the Germans occupied Hungary. The next month, April, Judith's family was moved into a ghetto by Hungarian officials. In June 1944, she and her family were deported to Auschwitz, where she was gassed upon arrival. She was just 12 years old.
Wilhelm Kusero, born in 1914 in Germany. Wilhelm was named after Germany's Emperor Wilhelm II, the oldest son in his family. He was raised Lutheran, but his family became the Jehovah's Witnesses. The family underwent scrutiny by the Nazi police because witnesses believed their highest loyalty was to God, not to Hitler. The family was repeatedly searched, but they continued to practice their faith. In 1940, Wilhelm was arrested for refusing to join the German army. It was against his religion's faith. Thou shalt not kill. To Wilhelm, God's law came before Hitler's law. The judge tried to change his mind and offered to remove his execution order if he changed his beliefs. Wilhelm refused, and the court sentenced him to death. He died in accordance with his convictions. He was shot by a firing squad in Monster Prison on April 27, 1940. He was 26 years old.
Rachel Celestus, born 1917 in Poland. Rachel was the 8th child born to an Orthodox Jewish family. She spoke several languages. Her brother was in Palestine, and her boyfriend got a visa to immigrate to America. She and her boyfriend became engaged, and he moved to the US. A week later, Germany invaded Poland. She could not join her fiancé and lost contact with her brother. The Nazis established a Jewish ghetto in her town, and Rachel worked there as a secretary. In 1942, the Jews in her town were sent to a larger ghetto in another town. The German she has worked for in her town did offer to hire her back, but Rachel said she would take the job only if he could help her get papers that would save her family from deportation. In July 1942, Rachel, her mother, and sisters, along with their families, were all deported to the Belzec death camp, where they were murdered.
Bino Helmer, born in 1923 in Czechoslovakia. Bino was the oldest of 3 children in his Jewish family. His mother was originally from Austria and his father from Sweden. The family spoke German at home. His parents sent him to Budapest, Hungary to attend high school. Because he had a talent for languages, he got a job as extras in movies. His parents went to Budapest to try to avoid the Nazis, but this plan didn't work and they were deported to Poland just before the German invasion. His family had to move to the Lodz ghetto. There, they were always hungry and people were dying all around them. Benno saw a Nazi take a child by the legs and swing him against the wall, killing him. Benno was sent to Therestad, Auschwitz, and Birkenwald. After the war, he helped track down worm criminals in Europe. He came to the U.S. in 1947.
I'd like to welcome to the stage Dean Carolyn S. Terry. Carolyn is the college-wide lead dean for English, the Honors Program, Women's Studies, Montgomery Scholars. She does a tremendous amount for us. She has been a true leader. Just a touch about her background. She's been with the college since 1989. She earned both her BA and MA from the Pennsylvania State University. And she is currently studying for her doctorate in community college leadership at Morgan State University. Today is a particularly long and special day for Dean Terry. This morning, in the wee hours, we had the 25th anniversary breakfast event for the Women's Studies program, and Dean Terry was honored with the On Her Shoulders We Stand award. Dean Terry, if you'll join us here at the podium, we have a little treat for you. We would like to honor you for your support and to let you know that all of these programs, women's studies, honors, humanities, we all thrive under your leadership, and we thank you so much.
Thank you. That's really so nice. I have to acknowledge before beginning tonight that it's so wonderful to have Myrna here, not just because of this event, but as we mentioned this morning, Myrna also founded the Women's Studies program 25 years ago. So maybe we can give her applause for that one as well. They're not bad footsteps to follow. I'm here tonight to give you remarks from Dr. Judy Ackerman, who is the provost for the Rockville campus and the vice president. But unfortunately, she's on an accreditation visit, and she's unable to be here this evening. She did ask that I read the following remarks. I'm sorry that I am unable to be here with you this evening for our annual Holocaust Commemoration, an important tradition of remembrance. When we hold this event each year, we say that we will not forget. We will not let this happen again. In doing so, we publicly reaffirm our commitment to human rights and to preventing cruelty and injustice, which sadly continue to take place in too many places around the world today. I am proud to be part of an institution that welcomes students, faculty, staff, community members, and civic leaders to such an event. A special welcome to the survivors and their families. Many of you have been joining us each year for our commemoration, but some have more recently begun to participate. We thank you for continuing to share your stories with us. Thank you.
We are honored this evening to have some music provided by the students of Dr. Dawn Avery, who is our very spectacular award-winning music teacher. Our students this evening are Ruth Bright and Laura Song.
When she was 10, Edith Lowy's family was forced to leave their homeland in Poland. They hoped to continue on to any country that would take them. They were trapped because the Germans invaded Poland before they could leave. Her mother died in the Treblinka gas chamber, and her only brother, age 11, was shot in the Plaszow concentration camp. From Plaszow, Edith was deported to Skarżysko-Kamina labor camp and then to Buchenwald. She was liberated by the Soviet army from a death march, barely alive. She lived in Israel for 10 years before coming to the U.S. with her husband and baby daughter. Manny Mandel was raised in unoccupied Hungary with its numerous clauses restriction on Jews. From 1942 through 1944, He can recall air raids, bombings, and pogroms, as well as the yellow star pinned to his coat when he entered first grade. In the spring of 1944, he was part of the Katzner train that was taken to Bergen-Belsen and later transferred to Switzerland after intensive, lengthy negotiations. In 1945, Manny's family moved to Palestine, and in 1949, they came to the U.S., where his father had been living for about a year. In 1972, his family moved to Montgomery County. Manny is a psychotherapist, and his wife Adrienne was a state representative. He is active in religious, civic, and community affairs.
I'd like to thank all of you for coming today. The work that I do for the Humanities Institute and my capacity as the coordinator for Portraits of Life, and especially working with the survivors, is really a joy and one of the most meaningful things that I can do. And it wouldn't be right to call that work because it's such a labor of love, and it's a pleasure to work with such amazing people. Many of you know who are here quite a bit about the Holocaust, and there's some who do not. But the enormity of it cannot be understood outside the context of the Second World War. I wanted to provide a little bit of context. Before the Second World War, the areas dominated by Nazi Germany discriminated against its Jewish citizens, often despoiling and evicting them. But beginning in 1939 with the German invasion of Poland, which provoked the Second World War, and then in the following years, so by the middle of 1941, Germany was in control over much of Europe. And it was at this juncture that the Nazi leadership were in a position to put into practice their so-called racial policies, and they made a decision to advance what they euphemistically called the final solution. That is the extermination of the Jewish people and others, individuals and groups they deemed lesser beings. Now we're fortunate to have on our panel two Holocaust survivors, Edith Lowy and Manny Mandel, both of whom were in Europe during the period that we're talking about. Edith was originally from Czechoslovakia, but she and her family found themselves in Poland at the beginning of the war. Manny was from Hungary, which was an ally of Germany during the war and was not subjected to direct German control until somewhat later. So clearly they both had different experiences of the war and of the Holocaust. I'll be posing, the format that we'll be following is I'll be posing some questions to the two of them and engaging them to elucidate what they saw, what they experienced, and learned. In other words, to bear witness to those terrible times. Now, we don't have a tremendous amount of time, and we can only cover so much, but I'd also like to mention that our panelists will be available after the program. I know many people may have questions that they'd like to ask and cover ground that we can't in this program. And additionally, Edith was generous enough to bring the dress that she had to wear in the concentration camp. And so she will be glad to show that to people later if you're interested. Now to begin, wanted to ask Edith first, she wouldn't mind talking a little bit about her family life before the war.
As you heard, I was born in Czechoslovakia. I grew up in a very small coal mining community. Beside my family, my grandpa and two of his daughters, there were no Jews in the immediate community. Nearby, in a larger city, were many Jews. None of my friends at this time were Jewish. My parents had a general store in a community, very hardworking, very decent and supportive community. I had one brother, younger brother, Eric. I used to love Sundays because Sundays, while my mom was making delicious lunches, my dad took Eric and me for walks. Sometimes we went to the nearby town and Dad bought some delicious pastry to bring home, and sometimes he took us to some ponds and carved whistles for us. In the afternoon, went to our grandpa. It was about 20 minutes walk, and there we met. My mother was one of 6 sisters and one brother. 3 of the sisters were married and had children. So everybody came to Grandpa, and I loved to go there because, first of all, because the family was together, and I loved where Grandpa lived. It was a streetcar was going by, and I loved to wave to the passengers. And behind my grandpa's house was nearby was a creek and meadows and woods, and we loved to play there with neighborhood children. It was a very wonderful, peaceful life. And when I was far away, probably this place, the meadows, the family and my grandpa's house was the place I missed the most.
Thank you. I'm going to pose the same question to Manny about your life of your family before the war. How would you characterize that?
Ken, as you said before, Hungary has a peculiar history in relation to Germany. While it was not occupied until 1944, actually, it was an ally from 1940 on. The significant point, however, is that Hungary had its own Nazi party. Their symbol was the crossed arrows. They were called the nyilas. And in many ways, the Hungarian numerous clauses, the laws against Jews, were as vicious as any place else. But we lived at home. We were not deported. And for a child of 6, 7, 8, and 9, life was very nice, as protected by the bubble that his parents were able to provide. However, very early in this life, an incident took place which at the time I didn't understand, but I remember. I will tell you what that was briefly, and it is something that I think about now as my introduction to the Second World War and to the Holocaust. My mother came from southern Hungary, known to you most of the time as the former Yugoslavia. Her hometown had only 3 names: in German, in Hungarian, and in Serbo-Croatian, depending on who happened to have ruled. My father came from eastern Hungary. But wintertime 1941, my parents and I went by train from Budapest to Novi Sad, the city of my mother's youth, to visit with my grandparents, my mother's parents. And we stayed in my aunt's house, my mother's sister. One morning, we were there for 2 or 3 days, I don't recall exactly how many. One morning, somebody came upstairs early and said, "There's something going on the street, and you'll find out what it is as soon as they come upstairs to tell you," which they did. 2 policemen came up and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, you need to dress warmly, you need to go outside, we have to run a census." Now, they ran a census 5 times a week, sometimes 5 times a day, and I think sometimes 5 times an hour. There was nothing unusual about counting the people to make certain that everybody was exactly where they wanted them to be. We went outside, dressed warmly, we were told to turn left and start walking in that direction, which we did. We walked for some time, maybe several hours. I know my father carried me, I was a little boy, I worked with my mother. Everybody was dressed warmly. There was nothing about it that was unusual in a sense that it was dangerous. We arrived after a while at a place which had an 8-foot stockade fence. And even I recognized it as being the Danube River's area where there had been where there always was a summertime beautiful pool and swimming area, wave pools and all kinds of other summertime excitement. My parents, of course, knew it, but even I recognized it, and we were there marching along the stockade fence, advancing in that direction. We saw that there was a gate that was open, and we were beginning to approach that gate. As we come fairly close, a policeman on the right says to my father, "Mister, what are you doing here?" My father says, "I'm visiting my in-laws." He says, "But you're not from here." He says, "Well, how do you know that?" He says, "Because I'm a policeman from Budapest, and I recognize you from the streets in the neighborhood where you lived and where you work. Please step aside," which we did. Coincidental with our stepping aside, a staff car came down, talked to some of the people. We were all told to go to the gymnasium of the school that was very close by, have something warm to drink, and go home. The next morning at, I think, 6 o'clock, or as early as we could, we got into a taxi, well, actually it was a horse-drawn sleigh, and took the train back to Budapest, because when there's something going on that's unusual and difficult to understand, you go home. It's the first thing you do. Nobody knew exactly what went on that day until they found out the next morning. We had participated and almost, in fact, were involved in a pogrom, the well-known Novi Sad pogrom, where several hundred people were killed. Everybody who walked through that gate and turned left was marched about 300 yards down to the Danube itself, where the ice had been chopped open. They were shot and found the next spring. This is December. They were found in March. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is a way to tell you that since I had no idea what was going on at the time, but have learned what was going on much later, it was the introduction of a 5.5-year-old to the Holocaust.
Edith, could you tell us a little bit about how circumstances changed for you with the outbreak of the war?
When the Germans occupied the Sudetenland, Poland occupied my part of Czechoslovakia, and as Jews we had to get out within a month. We came to Poland. I did go, Eric and I went to school for a short time until when the war broke out. Soon after this, there were restrictions imposed on the Jews. You probably heard Jews were not allowed to go to certain stores. There were signs, Jews and dogs not allowed. Jews were not allowed to use public transportation. Jews were not allowed to use recreational facilities. Jews were not allowed to leave the community where they lived. And then from the age of 10, Jewish people had to wear a white band with a Star of David. You can imagine from how far one can see a white band telling everybody there is a Jew. I was very proud in the beginning to wear this armband because I was already more than 10 years old, and Eric, my brother, was under 10, he was not, so I felt very grown up. Until one time I went with Eric and a cousin Eric's age for a walk, and a Polish teenager came and lit a match and threw the match into my cousin's beautiful blonde curly hair. I felt responsible. I was the oldest. I tried to put out the fire and ran home. From this day, I was really terrified to wear this white band. Then things started being more and more difficult. Dad was taken one night on trucks away. We didn't know if we will see him the next day. Then we had to go to the ghetto. And when my father was taken away, as I said, we didn't know if we will see him again, but he came home after a few days and told us that he is working on the railroad tracks where we used to live before we went to the ghetto. One day Dad came, Dad and my uncle, who married my mother's youngest sister, just shortly before the outbreak of the war. They were together, and I was with my mother's sister. And he told us that the Jewish people from the ghetto will be deported. Of course, it sounded terrible, but as children, we really didn't fully understand what it meant. But the grown-ups decided that we have to get out of there. So how do we go? We were a big group, and it's impossible to go. We were supposed to wear the bands. We were not allowed to leave the community. So they decided that first they have to protect the children. So Eric and I were supposed to go with my dad and my uncle to the railroad tracks where my dad was working, and from there, Dad was supposed to take us into hiding. So my dad and uncle, we walked through the night. Of course, it was very scary because we disobeyed so many rules. In the morning, Dad hid us under a boxcar. He must have been sure that it's not going to go anywhere. I can imagine how he worked the whole day knowing that we are under the boxcar hiding, and my little brother Eric was quite a rascal, that we will not talk and that nobody will, that somebody might hear us and pull us out of there. Anyway, evening came and Dad took us into hiding, and the following day he went to get Mother and my mother's sister. My mother thought that it cannot happen, nothing can happen so fast. She still wanted to do something, and she asked my aunt to go, that she will come the next day. Well, next day was too late. Next day, we heard the Jews were already loaded in the boxcar and taken away. You cannot imagine what it was like knowing that your mother was taken away, not knowing where. We were totally devastated by it.
Thank you. Manny, you've already talked a little bit about the pogrom that affected your family, and I wonder if you'd go further on, talk about as the war progressed, what the circumstances were like.
In one way, life in Hungary was pretty, quote, normal, unquote. I have to put it in quotes. As a kid remembers, the pain is not there. The memories are there. The understanding comes later, and with that, the pain sometimes is less severe. But the best I can do is give you a couple of vignettes of what impact there was because of what was going on. We didn't have to wear armbands. We wore yellow stars. I walked to school, first grade, with a yellow star. I was very proud of that yellow star. I had no idea that this was a mark of Cain that was on me in many ways. I also didn't know that on many days, somebody would follow me to school to make sure I got there. Because it would not have been totally unusual and out of the ordinary for a kid with a yellow star, first grade, to be hit in the head, left on a gutter, and nobody would say boo. Now, I need to tell you that we lived at number 13 of the street. The school was at number 44. In other words, the walk to school was perhaps 2.5 blocks. We had an apartment on the corner of the building on the 5th floor, top floor, and from my parents' bedroom you could see the school. You could follow me walking. Yet these precautions were taken. And this was important within the context of Budapest, which was a city of 1 million people, or from 200,000, 20% were Jews. A tremendous population. The Jewish community was quite significant, and I was part of that. But I thought the Yellow Star was great until I found out how ungreat it was, because one of the things I wanted at the age of 7 or so is to have a bicycle. Why not? And my father had a long discussion with me and said the following. First of all, I can buy you a bicycle or 6. That's not the point. Economics is not the issue. We do live on the 5th floor of the building, and there is an elevator which is invariably out of service because the parts that break in a 50-year-old building are manufactured in a factory which now manufactures munitions, not elevator parts. But that's okay. I could take the bicycle down. He was a young man in his 30s. I could have you go to the park and ride and come back and take the bicycle up. Because those of you who know anything about Europe to this day, you don't ride in your backyard. He said, but I won't do that. Why? Because if you're out of my sight in the park riding a bicycle for 10 seconds, somebody might take the bike. Because he'll identify you with the yellow star. Now all of a sudden having a yellow star had meaning for me. I didn't like it. Because that was a mark that was on me. And lastly, about my father. From 1942 on, even earlier than that, the Hungarian men were conscripted into the Hungarian military. They fought in Russia. To replace them doing the jobs that men could not do because they were out of the country, they conscripted Jews into labor battalions, all in Hungary. These are not the labor camps. They did mining, and they did road building, and they did fixing of places which had been dug up by constant air raids and bombings. And my father would be away and home irregularly, and it was absolutely normal for me not to see him, as though he'd been a traveling salesman who left and came back. A little later on, I realized what impact it had on me, that for the period from 1941-42 to 1946, I hardly saw him. In those of my years, when my father was not around, although I was with my mother, I certainly missed his impact on my growing up.
Edith, you talked already about how difficult it was to lose your mother unexpectedly, and I wonder if you wouldn't mind talking about some other poignant memories from that time.
It is really difficult to decide which part of this kind of life to tell. As I said before, my mother was taken away. We didn't know where she was. My father took us into hiding, and we were hiding in 3 different places. Then we heard about the labor camp nearby. So I guess the family decided that the hiding places were really so terrible. Actually, the last hiding place was really very unusual. My father was working on the railroad tracks, and my uncle. And somehow 2 of the Germans who were supervising the operation there took liking to my father and my uncle, and they wanted to help. So they decided that we can hide in the cellar of the building where the Polish and German construction workers were working. This was a cellar, no windows, no air. There were just big crates in it. And every time some Germans stopped in front, of course, we were fearful that they will find us in this horrible place. The only people that knew that we were there were our former neighbors and 2 priests. And the priests wanted to make Aryan papers for us. So we thought maybe that's another way that we can hopefully survive if we go somewhere on Aryan paper. My uncle, my aunt's young husband, and my father somehow obtained some liquid to color my aunt's hair. As I was doing it, she said, pour more of the solution, pour more of the solution. I was pouring more and more and more, and suddenly her skin started bubbling and chunks of hair were coming out, and here we were in this cellar. I couldn't ask anybody what to do, how to get out, how to help her. Anyway, she lost all her hair, and that was the end of Aryan paper. Then we heard about this labor camp. The grown-ups decided that it probably is safer to survive in a labor camp, to work, labor means work, than to be in this horrible hiding place. So we practically walked into the labor camp. Life in the labor camp was very different from concentration camp. In a labor camp, if you did what you were supposed to do, if you did not disobey their orders, nobody was shooting indiscriminately. But we heard about this horrible camp in walking distance from this labor camp, and people were saying that they would rather die here than go to this horrible concentration camp. But this was not our choice to be made. The labor camps were liquidated, and we had to go to the concentration camp. Anybody of you have seen the film Schindler's List? This was the camp in Poland near Kraków, Warsaw. I was walking with the women's group, and Eric, my brother, was walking with the men. As soon as we reached the gates of the camp, children were separated from the parents. There was a lot of crying, a lot of pleading and screaming, and the children were crying and the grown-ups were crying. They didn't want to let the children go. But, of course, nothing helped, and the Nazis told us that children will be taken to separate barracks. Children were taken away, and I found myself in a huge room with all the women. The women noticed that our men were below in a barrack separated by a fence. Toward the evening, I heard terrible machine gun fire, and I completely froze. I thought, no, it cannot be. I had a premonition that our children are being killed. We were taken the next day to work to carry, of course, we were carrying big boards from one side of the camps to the other, and always searching for our loved ones. I was looking for father. After 2 or 3 days, finally, his group was approaching us, and as we came next to each other, my father grabbed him. I couldn't recognize my father in the couple of days what happened to him. He grabbed me and hugged me, and I said, just Eric, and my father said, not here anymore, and moved away. We couldn't talk. Few days later, we were rounded, and we were led to the railroad tracks, and were supposed to go in the horrible cattle trains to a different concentration camp. As I was standing at the railroad station with my aunt, my father found me and said to me, "Do you see the hill?" He said, "That's where Eric is." Only later, when we reached the other camp, I found out that when our children were killed, and these were children up to age of 16, I was 14 at this time. I didn't realize that I was with another girl, that we were the only ones left from the whole big group of children. In the other camp, I found out that when the children were killed, they were covered with soil. And they selected 50 people, 50 men, to bury him. My father was among them.
Thank you. Manny, the Holocaust in its most murderous form came to Hungary in 1944, and a significant proportion of the Hungarian Jewish population perished as a result. Can you talk a little bit about how you were able to survive?
The Wannsee Conference of 1942 coined and set forth the process of the final solution to the Jewish question. Adolf Eichmann was appointed as its manager, and he did a very good management job of clearing most of Europe of Jews. The last country that he came to, for obvious reasons of having been at one point allies, not longer in 44, but in 40, they began to clear out the Jews of Hungary. My grandparents in southern Hungary and my grandmother in eastern Hungary all went to Auschwitz. Eichmann arrives in Budapest in March of 1944. Almost as soon as he arrives, two things happen. One, transport for 12,000 people a day begins to various and sundry concentration, death, and labor camps. 12,000 a day. Many of these had been herded into Budapest from the hinterlands. The second thing that happens is that he's approached by two people from the Jewish community leadership, as it were, one of them, one Roger Kastner, the other one Joel Brand. And in the discussions, they insist on seeing Eichmann, which he grants almost out of surprise or out of wonderment as to why these two Jews want to see him. Now, Eichmann is the biggest dog in town. He could have done anything he wished, and he did do most what he wished. But he heard them out, and in the discussion came a proposal so absurd that everybody knew it was absurd. The proposal was that Eichmann would receive 10,000 trucks loaded with munitions and coffee and supplies and materiel from the Western Allies to be used against the East, namely Russia, and in exchange he would release 1 million Jews. This was a decision to have an exchange of blood for weapons or blood for materiel. Now, it was so absurd, everybody knew this could not happen. I didn't, but then again, I was only 8 years old. Out of these discussions, Joel Brand was sent to talk to the Allies in Egypt. He was arrested in Syria, spent the rest of the war from 1944 to 45 in jail as a spy. Kastner continued negotiations with Eichmann. Can you imagine David negotiating with Goliath? Or any other symbolic size difference of that sort. Out of these negotiations came a plan whereby Eichmann, in fact, now not for 10,000 trucks, but for a great deal of valuables, known as valuta. These are portable valuables, not Hungarian money that was worthless. But there were some British pounds sterling, some dollars, a great deal of gold, a great deal of diamonds, those things that have value no matter where you are. Were exchanged for a group of 1,700 people, selected in a manner that's much too complicated to explain for the moment. And I and my mother were two of those people. My father was in a labor camp, as I said to you. He could not join us. We were put on trains, much as the ones that you see at the Holocaust Museum. We rode for 9 hours, allegedly to a port, to be dispatched by ship to Palestine. We all claimed to be displaced persons, held in Hungary because of the war. The details of that also are fantastic. Can't explain them to you this moment. However, we went for 9 days. Now the cars were sealed. 60 to 80 people to a car, but they were opened at night, and this was July, the weather was okay, we could sleep outside. You can endure almost anything when it's fairly short-timed, namely 9 days. And we arrived at a place that that we were told, is a rest and recuperation place before we boarded ship. The place of rest and recuperation was known as Bergen-Belsen. Negotiations continued because our group was traceable. And besides, the German leadership, all the way up to Himmler, did not want to kill the goose that laid the golden egg. As simple as that. You remember that Eichmann and others are captured in South America. Something had to pay for their villas and their incomes for the years following the war until their capture. Now, I'm not saying that was our money, but it was monies like ours and our money that paid for these things. We're in Bergen-Belsen, negotiations continue, and 350 people among the group of 1,700 plus are in fact taken by German troop trains to Switzerland in August of 44. You guessed right if you guessed that I wasn't one of them. However, by December, which is 6 months after we got there, my mother and I and the rest of the 1,700 people left behind were in fact taken by German troop trains, this time by troop trains, not by cattle cars, to the Swiss border. And I will never forget, if I live to be 206, the view of the German bombed out, dark, miserable troop train on one side of the platform to the warm, beautiful, lit, and immaculately clean Swiss train to which we were transferred. The war came to an end for me that day.
Can I please add something to what I said before?
Sure, and I was also going to ask you. Oh yeah, absolutely. And I also was going to say if you could talk about how almost unimaginable, but how you were able to survive.
Well, this was one of the miracles, really, that when our children were killed, I said up to the age of 16 and I was 14, why are all of them dead and I am here? The only explanation I have that because I was petite, I was hiding behind somebody that has simply overlooked me, because there is absolutely no other reason why they are dead and I am here. The day my brother Eric was killed is the only date I remember, November 15. When I found that Eric was dead, this was the only time in my life that I wanted to die. But I decided that I have to live, that I was all my father had left. I had to live for him.
And just could follow.
You only say another.
If you can take us to the end of the war for you.
Well, the end of the war, I was in Buchenwald. I would like just to tell you that while we were in, well, can I just say something about my work?
Sure.
It was in a camp called Skaržisko-Kamienna, not a very well-known camp, but a horrible camp. I was working a 12-hour shift, night shift and day shift. We were very hungry. I was working on a very huge machine, and it was standing. There was no place to sit. I was a young, undernourished teenager. It was a huge machine, and I had to carve rings around ammunition. I got a tray of ammunition, and I had to put the ammunition into the machine, open the machine, close up. It was a very difficult operation. When I was putting the ammunition into the machine, oil was dripping. I don't know if it was to lubricate it or to cool it, but the ammunition came out hot and burned my fingers completely. I couldn't ask for a Band-Aid because nobody wanted to say that something was wrong, that I couldn't work. But it was excruciating to stand for 12 hours and working on this machine. And I had to test the ammunition on a through a gauge. If the ammunition went through, the machine needed adjustment and the ammunition needed to be discarded. One time it was at the end of a night shift and I was totally exhausted. I didn't know what I was doing. It was automatic. I was putting in and almost screaming with my burnt finger when the German supervisor came to check the ammunition. He came and pulled it through the gauge and it went through. And he said, "Was ist denn das? What is this?" He took another ammunition and started louder, "Was ist denn das?" And another one, and another one. And louder he was screaming, "Was ist denn das? Was ist denn, what's that?" Then he took the ammunition and was banging my forehead with it. Almost the entire tray was bad. What could I tell him? That I couldn't do it any longer, that I'm at the end of my strength. He walked away to his office, which was near the big machine room. After a while, he came back and he called me. I knew what it meant. I was sure what it meant. As I was walking behind him, I could almost hear the silence of my fellow prisoners, and I could see their tears. As I was walking behind him, I thought, what will it do to my father when he finds out that he had lost me too? We came to his office, and he stared at me and stared at me for a while, and then he said, "Take a broom, sweep my office, and go back to work." This was my other miracle of the many, that I was sure that this was my last day.
Thank you. And we just have a few short minutes, so I would just ask both of you to briefly, given what you went through and what you learned, do you have a message, a statement you'd like to make, particularly directed towards those who are just learning about what the Holocaust is? Manny, would you like to start?
A man about 100 and some years ago said, "You will remember what he said, you may not remember his name." His name was George Santayana, who said, "Those who do not learn their history well may be doomed to repeat it." This is not my way of saying that if we don't learn history, we're going to have a Holocaust or a World War or anything like that. But I am saying it's our job to learn what we can about what man can do to man or women to women, to be at least fair, in that the inhumanity of people to people is something that we can do something about if we know about it. The museum, the Holocaust Museum, where both of us volunteer, has a special exhibit called From Memory to Action. It begins with a statement of Elie Wiesel, who said, "Never again." And then the point was made to say, "Never again, now what?" And they feature 3 genocides that happened in the 90s, Sudan, Rwanda, and Darfur. My point being that if we learn about what humans do to humans, we can do something about it. And I leave you with a message of, let's do something about it.
Thank you. Edith?
I'll read to you a message which usually I'm giving away when I speak in school. Don't take anything in your life for granted. Cherish the people who love you and who mean much to you. Appreciate the way you live and the freedom you have to make choices. Remember that you are among the last ones to hear the story of the Holocaust directly from us, the survivors. There are not many of us left to tell you about the evil, the pain, and the unbelievable suffering that man can inflict on man. Although it is not always easy for us to speak about it, we feel that it is our responsibility to do so. We feel that we owe it to the memory of those who were so brutally silenced. We also owe it to future generations. As we honor the memory of those who perished in the Holocaust, and as we recall the unspeakable horror, we must also remember those Gentiles who, in a mostly silent world of terror and fear, sacrificed their own safety and security and risked their own and often their families' lives to help and rescue Jews. We wish we could assure you that the world you live in today will always remain peaceful and safe, but we cannot. We can only hope that it will be. You can help to make it happen. By talking to you, we hope that we can alert you not to close your eyes, your ears, and your hearts to injustice, unfairness, intolerance, and cruelty. We hope that you will fight them as soon as you can see them, so that tragedies like the Holocaust will never happen again. As survivors who will soon be gone, it is our hope that you will continue teaching our lesson to others and to your children, and that you will strive to make the world a better and safer place to live in. Thank you for listening, and good luck to you.
Yes, thank you for sharing, because I know it's not very easy. As to say, it's very difficult to talk about these things, but I think we're certainly better for it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Abri meshkalanika que ava amanecer. Abri meshkalanika que ava amanecer. Abrir ya vos abro mi lindo amor. La noche no duermo pensando en vos. Mi padre está meldando mozoyera. Mi padre está meldando mozoyera. A matar de la lucecica así se dormirá. A matar de la lucecica así se echará. Mi madre está cosiendo mozoyera. Mi madre está cosiendo mozoyera. Pedra de la algúgica así se dormirá, pedra de la algúgica así se echará. Abrime escalanica que ya va a amanecer, abrime escalanica que ya va a amanecer, abrir ya vos abro mi lindo amor, la noche no duermo pensando en vos, abrish mi galanica que ya va a amanecer, abrish mi galanica que ya va a amanecer, abrir ya vos abro mi lindo amor, la noche no duermo pensando en vos.
In memory of the helpless infants, children, and teenagers who were cut down like young trees before their time, before they had a chance to experience life.
Really, that light's not pulling anything on.
In memory of all the others who died with their children in their arms. In memory of all the mothers and fathers who were cruelly separated from their families.
Did that give you what you wanted? That's fine.
In memory of all scholars, teachers, and rabbis who were first to be seized. In memory of the heroes of the resistance who fought the Nazis, so few against so many. And in memory of those who gave their lives to help their brothers and sisters under the Nazis.